All right. So for our schlong today, we are going to talk about another Supreme Court ruling, which happened late last week, the Chevron ruling. And so we've got a few videos about this. If you haven't heard about this ruling, it is very consequential. Okay. And it's a good ruling. And so the first video that you're going to see is just literally a straight news report about it. Like it is just, here is the ruling and here's what it means. And then we're going to get into somebody who's super for it and somebody who's super against it. But first, here's the straight, just this is what it means.
The Supreme Court's decision to overturn the Chevron deference drastically reduces the power of federal agencies to independently create regulations affecting nearly 20,000 laws and standards. Now, courts will have the final say on whether federal agencies have acted within their authority rather than automatically deferring to agency interpretations of ambiguous laws. Critics of this decision are concerned about the increased judicial power over regulatory matters, while proponents of the decision see it as a helpful reinforcement of the separation of powers.
So that's the straight and narrow. Like that's what happened. And this all had to do with a fisher, like a I don't know if it was a group of fishermen or like one fisherman who they were, a regulatory agency was requiring fishing boats to have a monitor on them. And for some reason, they were able to tell these fishermen, you have to have a monitor that watches what you do when you're out there doing your thing, and you have to pay for it. And it was costing like something crazy, like $700 a day or something ridiculous. God. And so the agency was saying, you have to have this, and yet the government doesn't have a mechanism with which to pay that monitor. So you have to do it. And so the fishermen were like, what the hell? How do you get to tell us how to run our business? This is totally an overreach. Yeah. That was what the case was about. And the Supreme Court said, yeah, that was an overreach. This is crazy. And the regulatory agencies have way too much power.
Yep.
So you guys have seen this guy before. This is Andrewski. He is on TikTok and he's wildly popular and hilarious. Like normally his videos are not political and they're just super funny. He is a lawyer and he is hopping mad about this case. So you're going to hear the perspective of lefties and what they think about this ruling.
Everyone, I want you to know that if you're freaking out about Chevron being overturned, as an attorney, it's actually worse than you think. It's bad. It's really, really bad. And basically, the way that it's worked in the last 40 years is this. Congress will pass a law, right? But sometimes that law is not exactly clear. And regulatory agencies are given authority to interpret that law on behalf of Congress. So, for example, let's say Congress passes a law and all it says is don't put bad shit in drinking water. Well, a regulatory agency would then have to decide what shit is bad for drinking water. They might say, well, putting more water into the drinking water isn't such a bad thing, but putting asbestos into the drinking water is. And if you do that, we're going to fine you and make sure you never do that again. The problem is, and I want to be very clear about this, companies want nothing more than to put asbestos in your drinking water. They would do it while dancing a little jig if it allowed them to save $1.50. And companies have the right to sue federal regulatory agencies to overturn the regulation that says they can't do that. In essence, to be allowed to put asbestos in your drinking water. Up until now, courts have given broad deference to those regulatory agencies' interpretations of congressional law. Basically, courts have said, well, these people are experts. They've studied the issue, so we'll just lean on their decision. But this new court case changes that. And instead, regulatory agencies are no longer given deference for their interpretation of congressional law. Only courts are allowed to interpret congressional law. You might be thinking, this doesn't sound like such a bad thing. Maybe these regulatory agencies should have to prove in court that their interpretation of congressional law is the right one. But there are two problems with this. And the first one is that lawsuits are expensive, even if you are the federal government. Now, imagine you're a federal regulatory agency who's being tasked with making sure the companies don't put asbestos in your drinking water, and all of a sudden you are being sued by every deep-pocketed corporation and company that does business in the United States. And you have to go through all of the rigmarole that your interpretation of this congressional law is right. You can see how this will tie up the court systems that are already bursting at the seams. The second worry is that you're going to have to prove this to a judge like Eileen Cannon, a judge whose only legal qualifications are that their daddy donated a considerable amount of money to the Trump re-election campaign, and that eventually this lawsuit will wind its way to the Supreme Court of the United States, where Justice Clarence Thomas will write a majority decision allowing companies to put asbestos in your drinking water, and then driving away in a brand new Winnebago paid for by the asbestos company. Okay, this is bad. It's bad, and I'm begging you all, vote for the goddamn cadaver.
That's the hysterical response.
It's very, very hysterical. They want to poison you.
Right.
They're going to poison your water because that's what corporations want to do, right? Anything that's private, wants to poison you. The government is the almighty deity. Private corporations want to poison you. Don't you guys know that?
I wanted to make sure that people remember our sponsor, Birch Gold. They are the premier precious metals educator. And you can obviously also invest with them and get gold and other precious metals from them. But when it comes to learning why you should, there is nobody better. And so if you have not been paying attention, and this is according to Birch Gold, they told us this week, a massive hit to the dollar just came in June because Saudi Arabia did not renew their 50-year petrodollar deal with the United States. And that this has been in place since 1974. Saudi Arabia has sold oil solely in dollars. And the fact that they're now like, we're looking at other options now. Oh my God. That says bad things about the dollar. And so when there is less demand for the dollar, what happens to it, right? This is why Birch Gold exists. And it's why you should be hurrying to your phone and texting the word chicks to 989898 to get your free information kit. So you can learn all about how buying gold from Birch Gold might be really, really good for you, your family, and your family's future. So text the word chicks to 989898 right now. This is a really, really good thing, actually. And it gives regulatory agencies the way less power. They were calling them the fourth estate, right?
Yes.
I mean, and there was a reason for that. And so now we have someone more reasonable than Andrew explaining why this is actually a really good thing.
Normies are focused on the debate and the election question from last night. Something far more consequential just went down today thanks to the Supreme Court. Stick with me. I'm going to explain how a group of fishermen just took down the fourth branch of government and restored the Constitution.
Yes.
Okay, so in 1984, you had a bunch of judges at the time who were what we call judicial activists, meaning that they are not really restrained to interpretations of the law based on the Constitution or originalism or even based on like stare decisis, which means precedent that's come before. Instead, they just tend to make up law that best suits them. So in 1984, there was a ruling known as the Chevron doctrine. And in it, the court basically said that when Congress writes a piece of legislation giving unelected bureaucrats and government agencies power to oversee something, if there's ambiguity in that law, the agency, the bureaucrats, the experts, get to basically just decide what their own powers are. Not the courts, not Congress, the unelected bureaucrats. So needless to say, this has coincided with an absolute explosion in rules and regulations over the past several decades.
Yes.
To the point where I would argue Americans are no longer actually living in a representative government for a number of reasons, but predominantly because your elected lawmakers are not the ones really making most of the rules that govern your lives. Instead, it's what we call the fourth branch of government, a bunch of unelected bureaucrats and government agencies. But in a case that was decided today, known as the Loper case, a group of fishermen brought a challenge to this law and they won, overturning the Chevron doctrine. This is massive. Everybody in my movement, everybody in like libertarian conservative think tank world is freaking out. What this means is that the constitutional order that was supposed to exist is somewhat returned. One thing I love about this and similar issues when they've come up is when the left loses, their whole argument is that this is a power grab. Like, no, it's actually just restoring the power to where it was supposed to be. But like, think about that for a minute.
Yes.
I don't know how after 2020 to 2023, people still with a serious straight face tell us we should trust the experts. But that's literally their argument. They're like, the experts in these agencies know best. And how could the courts or Congress possibly speak to all the very complicated issues they work on? That's why they have staffs, they have research fellows, they have amicus briefs, they have friends of the court. And honestly, if the government has its hands in so many issues that the people who are supposed to be governing can't have a thorough knowledge of the issues they're governing, then that again should show you that you need to limit the government.
Yeah, I mean, have they seen our government lately? Right? And that one lawyer, it's like, he's one of those govern me harder, daddy.
Exactly.
He's one of those. And that's what liberals are. This is a good thing. It does restore more power to the people. That's what our founders wanted. That's a good thing. So they don't understand the Constitution if they're upset about this, because, you know, bureaucrats have had more and more power, and there's been more and more regulations. And if you own a small business, you understand this. And so this is a win. And that's why libertarians and conservatives are excited about it, because we get that.
It's the restoration of the balance of power, and it is the removal of all the power, not the removal, but the tempering of the power of all of these unelected bureaucrats, which is a really good thing, because as a reminder of the kinds of people that are making decisions that literally change your personal life, here is who is in charge now of the CDC. So just imagine this person making decisions without any checks and balances.
Probably the person I called most was the Secretary of Health and Human Services in Massachusetts. She worked for a Republican governor, but you know, when she was like, "Are you going to let them have professional football?" And I was like, "Nope." And she's like, "Okay, neither are we." You know, it was like conversations like that. So, or I'd be like, "So when are you going to think about lightening up a mess?" They're like, "Next Monday." I'm like, "Okay, next Monday."
Yep. I posted that clip on our Instagram about a month ago, and I'm like, never forget this biatch. Never forget. This is the kind of stuff that you have to remember when you go to the polls.
These are the experts that we were giving deference to, you guys.